Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to share a story that still keeps me awake at night. A story about a house clearance job in Bath, an old wooden box filled with Georgian gold, and a split-second decision that changed everything. This isn't a tale of triumph, it's a confession. Make yourself comfortable, grab a cup of tea, and let's begin. In the summer of 2022, I was 31 years old and working for a house clearance company based in Bristol. If you've never heard of house clearance, let me explain. When someone dies and their relatives can't or won't deal with sorting through decades of accumulated possessions, they hire people like us. We come in, we empty the house, we separate what's valuable from what's rubbish, and we leave the property ready for sale or rent. It's not glamorous work. You spend your days elbow deep in other people's lives, their photograph albums, their clothing, their half-used bottles of prescription medication. You see, how people lived, what they treasured, what they hoarded. Most of it ends up in a skip or at the charity shop. Occasionally, you find something valuable, a piece of jewelry, a rare book, a painting. When you do, you're supposed to set it aside for the family. Supposed to. The company I worked for was small. Just my boss, Steve, myself, and another lad called Dave. Steve had been doing house clearances for 20 years. He knew the business inside out. He was fair, paid on time, didn't ask questions if you arrived late smelling of last night's lager. It was steady work, and in 2022, with the cost of living going through the roof, steady work was worth its weight in gold. Literally, as it turned out. We got the call on a Tuesday morning in mid-July. Steve came into the yard where Dave and I were loading furniture into the van. "Got a new job," he said, checking his phone. "Solicitor's office in Bath. Elderly woman, died alone, no immediate family. 2 nephews are the beneficiaries. They want the house cleared by the end of next week. Standard terms. Anything obviously valuable goes to the family. Everything else is ours to dispose of." "Address?" I asked. "Royal Crescent area," Steve said. "Nice property. You two can handle it. I'll be working the Western job." Dave grinned. "Royal Crescent? That's serious money." "The house is worth a fortune," Steve agreed. "But the contents are probably worthless. Old lady lived there for 50 years. Nephews haven't visited in over a decade, according to the solicitor. They just want it empty so they can sell." The next morning, Dave and I drove to Bath. It was one of those perfect English summer days. Blue sky, warm sun, the kind of weather that makes you forget about the rain. Bath looked magnificent in the sunshine. All honey-coloured Georgian stone and elegant crescents. The house was on a quiet street just off the Royal Crescent. Not quite the crescent itself, that would have been worth 2 or 3 million, but close enough to be seriously expensive. A 3-story Georgian terraced house, original sash windows, black iron railings, a front door with a brass knocker in the shape of a lion's head. The solicitor had sent someone to meet us and hand over the keys. A young woman in her 20s, looked fresh out of university, wearing a suit that didn't quite fit. "The family wants everything removed," she said, handing me a set of keys and a business card. "Anything of obvious value, jewelry, important documents, family photographs, please box separately and we'll collect. Everything else you can dispose of as you see fit." "Did the family give any specific instructions?" Dave asked. "They said, and I quote, 'We don't want any of it. Just clear the house.'" She glanced at her watch. "I've got another appointment. Call me when you're finished." And she left. Dave and I stood on the pavement, looking up at the house. "Not very sentimental, are they?" Dave said. "No," I agreed. "Right then, let's see what we've got." We unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The smell hit us immediately. That particular odor of old age and long-term isolation. Stale air, dust, a faint trace of lavender, and underneath it all, the sweet, sour scent of decay. The house hadn't been opened in weeks, maybe months before the old lady died. The hallway was narrow, with a steep staircase leading up. The wallpaper was a faded floral pattern, probably from the 1960s. The carpet was worn threadbare in the center. A row of coats hung on pegs, ancient tweeds and raincoats that weighed a ton. We moved through the ground floor. The kitchen was tiny and outdated, a 1970s cooker, a fridge that hummed loudly, cupboards full of mismatched crockery. Tins of soup and baked beans, years out of date. We bagged it all. The living room was slightly more promising. A sofa with worn velvet upholstery, an old television, shelves crammed with paperback novels, mostly Catherine Cookson and Agatha Christie. There was a mahogany sideboard that might have been worth something if it hadn't been badly scratched and missing a handle. We set it aside anyway. The dining room had a table and 6 chairs, solid wood, but nothing special. On the walls were framed prints, nothing original, just reproductions of Constable landscapes. By lunchtime on the first day, we'd cleared the ground floor. It was exactly what Steve had predicted. The house itself was valuable, but the contents were worthless. The detritus of an ordinary life, lived alone on a modest income. "Poor old dear," Dave said, biting into a meal deal sandwich as we sat on the front step. "House worth over £1 million, and she's living like this. Bet the heating barely worked in winter." "Asset rich, cash poor," I said. Story of a lot of old people in this country. "And now the nephews are going to sell up and pocket the lot without even coming down to see what she left behind." Dave shook his head. "Doesn't seem right, does it?" "Not our business," I said, though I agreed with him. We spent the afternoon on the first floor, 2 bedrooms and a bathroom. The main bedroom had a single bed with a candlewick bedspread, a wardrobe full of clothes that smelled of mothballs, and a dressing table with a few items of costume jewelry. Nothing valuable. We boxed up the jewelry for the solicitor anyway, along with a bundle of old letters and some black and white photographs in frames. The second bedroom was being used for storage. Cardboard boxes everywhere, stacked against the walls, old suitcases, bags of fabric and wool. We spent an hour going through it all. More books, Christmas decorations, a Singer sewing machine from the 1950s, an old gramophone that didn't work. Nothing worth keeping. By the end of the second day, we'd nearly finished. Only the second floor remained, 2 small rooms under the eaves with sloped ceilings and dormer windows. We started on the 3rd morning. The first room was another bedroom, barely used. A narrow bed, a chest of drawers, a wardrobe containing a few old coats. We cleared it in an hour. The second room was a box room. Tiny, maybe 2 meters by 2 meters, with a ceiling that sloped down to barely a meter high at the back. It was absolutely crammed with boxes and bags, all shoved in haphazardly over decades. "Right," Dave said, surveying the chaos. "You take this, I'll finish the landing. Meet you downstairs in an hour." "Cheers," I muttered. I started pulling boxes out into the corridor where I had more room to work. Most of it was junk. Old newspapers from the 1980s and 90s, knitting patterns, postcards from seaside holidays, Weston-super-Mare, Torquay, Minehead. I felt a pang of sadness looking at them. This woman had lived such a small life. Her holidays had been modest coach trips to fading British seaside towns, and now her entire existence was being shoveled into bin bags by two strangers who never knew her name. I worked my way systematically through the boxes. More books, old curtains, a box of Christmas cards, decades old, from people whose names meant nothing to me now. Then I reached the back corner, where the ceiling was lowest. There was one last box, wedged right under the eaves. I had to crouch down and reach in to pull it out. It was smaller than the others, maybe the size of a shoebox, but it was heavy. Surprisingly heavy. It was made of dark, polished wood, mahogany or walnut, with brass corners and a brass clasp. The kind of box that had once been expensive. The wood was scratched and dulled with age, but you could tell it had been beautiful once. I opened the clasp and lifted the lid. Inside were coins, lots of them. They were wrapped in small cloth pouches and paper envelopes, all carefully bundled and stacked. I picked up one of the pouches. It was made of faded green velvet, tied with a thin ribbon that disintegrated as salve. I touched it. I opened the pouch and tipped the contents into my palm. Gold coins, 3 of them. They caught the light from the dormer window and gleamed. I felt my pulse quicken. I picked one up and examined it. It was about the size of a modern pound coin, but thicker and heavier. On one side was a coat of arms. On the other, a profile of a man with a wig. Definitely Georgian era. Maybe George III or George IV. I turned it over in my fingers. There was text around the edge, but it was worn. Still, I could make out enough. Britanniarum Rex, King of Britain. This was a guinea, an actual Georgian guinea. I put it down carefully and opened another pouch. More gold coins, these ones with Queen Victoria's profile. Sovereigns, probably. Victorian gold sovereigns. I opened another envelope. More coins. And another. And another. My hands were shaking now. I glanced toward the door. I could hear Dave downstairs, moving furniture, whistling tunelessly. I had maybe 10 minutes before he came looking for me. I pulled out my phone and quickly Googled Georgian guinea value, UK. The results made my stomach lurch. Depending on the year, condition and rarity, Georgian guineas were selling at auction for anywhere between £500 and £2,500 each. Victorian sovereigns, £350 to £900 each. I looked down at the box. I did a quick count. There had to be at least 300 coins in here. 300 gold coins. Even at the most conservative estimate, say £400 per coin, that was £120,000. More likely, it was considerably more. I sat back on my heels, the box in my lap, and stared at it. This was a fortune, an absolute fortune, and nobody knew it existed. The nephews hadn't been through the house. The solicitor hadn't done an inventory. The instructions had been clear. Clear the house, bin everything except obvious valuables. Were gold coins obvious valuables? Yes, of course they were. But if I didn't tell anyone, how would they ever know? I could feel the weight of the box in my hands. It was surprisingly heavy. Gold is dense. 300 gold coins probably weighed a couple of kilos at least. I thought about my life. I was 31 years old. I lived in a rented flat in a rough part of Bristol. I drove a 15-year-old Vauxhall Corsa that needed a new exhaust. I had £1,200 in my bank account and about £8,000 in credit card debt. I earned £28,000 a year, clearing out dead people's houses. I was going nowhere. And here, in my hands, was a way out. I won't pretend I agonized over the decision for hours. I didn't. The entire thought process took maybe 90 seconds. I thought, the nephews hadn't visited their aunt in 15 years. They didn't even come down to Bath to clear her house themselves. They hired strangers. They'd just inherited a house worth over £1 million. They were already wealthy. Would they even miss this money? And more to the point, how would they ever know? I made my decision. I closed the box, put it in my rucksack, and zipped it shut. Then I went back to clearing the room as if nothing had happened. 20 minutes later, Dave came upstairs. "You nearly done?" "Yeah," I said. "Just the usual junk, nothing valuable." "Same here. Shall we load up the van?" "Yeah, let's get this finished." We spent the rest of the day loading furniture and bags into the van, making trips to the tip and the charity shop. By 6 o'clock that evening, the house was empty. We locked up, posted the keys through the solicitor's letterbox with a note saying the job was complete, and drove back to Bristol. I had a box of gold coins in my rucksack, sitting on the floor of the van between my feet. Dave didn't notice. Why would he? When we got back to the yard, Steve asked how the job had gone. "Straightforward," I said. "House was full of junk, nothing valuable except some old photos and letters. We boxed those up and left them with the solicitor." "Good job," Steve said. "I'll invoice them tomorrow." I went home. I lived alone in a one-bedroom flat above a kebab shop. The flat smelled perpetually of fried onions and chili sauce. It was grotty, but it was cheap. I locked the door, put the box on my kitchen table, and opened it again. The gold coins gleamed under the fluorescent light. I just sat there, staring at them, for about an hour. Then I closed the box and shoved it under my bed. For the next week, I didn't touch it. I went to work as usual, cleared houses, came home, ate microwave meals, watched TV. The box sat under my bed like a bomb. I kept thinking, I should return it. I should call the solicitor and say I found something. But I didn't. Instead, I started researching. I spent my evenings on coin-collecting forums and auction websites, learning everything I could about Georgian and Victorian gold coins. I learned about sovereigns, half-sovereigns, guineas, how to identify dates and mints, what made a coin rare or common. After 10 days, I finally took the box out and did a proper inventory. There were 347 coins in total. About 2/3 were Victorian sovereigns from various dates between 1850 and 1900. The rest were Georgian guineas and half guineas dating from 1760s to 1820s. Some were in pristine condition, like they'd never been circulated. Others were worn but still identifiable. I took detailed photographs of each one. Then I contacted a coin dealer in Bristol. I found him through a Google search. He had a small shop in Clifton, specializing in antique coins and medals. His name was Michael. I called him and said I'd inherited a coin collection from a relative and wanted a valuation. He agreed to meet me at his shop. The shop was tucked down a side street, the kind of place you'd walk past 100 times without noticing. Inside, it was small and cluttered. Glass display cases full of coins and medals, shelves lined with reference books. Michael was in his 60s, grey-haired, wearing a tweed jacket with elbow patches. He looked exactly like you'd imagine a coin dealer to look. I put the box on the counter. He opened it, and his eyebrows went up. "Good Lord," he said quietly. He spent the next 3 hours examining the coins. He used the jeweler's loop, a digital scale, reference books. He made notes in a leather-bound notebook. He occasionally muttered to himself. Finally, he looked up. "This is an extraordinary collection," he said. Whoever put this together knew what they were doing. These aren't just random coins. They're carefully selected, high-quality examples. The Georgian guineas in particular are exceptional. Some of these are quite rare. "How much are we talking?" I asked. He tapped his pen on his notebook. "At auction, conservatively, I'd estimate between 250 and 300,000 pounds. Possibly more with the right buyers." I felt light-headed. "That much?" "Gold coins of this age and quality are highly sought after," he said, "particularly guineas in this condition. If you're willing to sell, I can offer you 220,000 pounds. Cash. Today." "Why less than the auction value?" I asked. "Because I'm taking the risk," he said. "I'll have to sell them on individually, which takes time, and I'm offering you cash, no questions asked, no paperwork. No capital gains tax implications for you." No questions asked. He knew, or at least he suspected. "Can I think about it?" I said. "Of course, but the offer stands for 48 hours. I left the shop with the box still in my rucksack. Over the next 2 weeks, I visited 3 more dealers, one in Bristol, one in Bath, one in Exeter. I got similar valuations, between £240,000 and £290,000. I decided to sell through multiple dealers, spreading the coins out so no single transaction would draw too much attention. By the end of September, I'd sold the entire collection. After commissions and fees, I'd made £267,000. £267,000. I kept the money in cash for a while, hidden in my flat. Then, gradually, I started moving it. I opened 3 different bank accounts, deposited money in chunks small enough not to trigger any automatic alerts. I told the banks it was an inheritance from a relative. They didn't ask for proof. By January 2023, the money was safely distributed across several accounts and a stocks and shares ISA. And then I started spending it. I quit my job with the clearance company, told Steve I was moving back up north to be near family. He wished me well, paid me what he owed, and that was that. I paid off my credit card debt, all £8,000 of it, gone in one payment. I bought a car. Nothing flashy, a 3-year-old Ford Focus, reliable, anonymous. But compared to my old Corsa, it felt like a Bentley. I put down a deposit on a flat. A proper flat, 2 bedrooms, in a decent part of Bristol. Mortgage. Approved, no problem. I had a huge deposit and a clean credit record. I gave my parents £10,000, told them I'd had a great year with work bonuses and I wanted to help with their mortgage. My mum cried. I started a business, property maintenance and small renovations. Used £50,000 to buy tools, a van, insurance, advertising. Within 6 months, I had more work than I could handle. By the summer of 2023, my life had completely transformed. I had a nice flat, a reliable car, a business that was making money, savings in the bank. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't worried about money. I should have been happy, but I wasn't. Because every time I looked at my flat, my car, my business, I thought, I stole this. I tried to rationalize it. The nephews had inherited £1 million house. They were already wealthy. They hadn't cared enough about their aunt to visit her while she was alive, or even to clear her house themselves when she died. Would an extra £250,000 really make a difference to them? But that logic didn't help. Because the truth was simple. Those coins weren't mine. They belonged to the estate, and I'd taken them. I hadn't broken into the house. I hadn't forged any documents, but I'd seen something valuable, something that should have gone to the legal heirs, and I'd put it in my rucksack and walked away. That's theft. The guilt got worse as time went on. I started having trouble sleeping. I'd lie awake at 3 in the morning, staring at the ceiling, thinking about that old woman. She'd lived in that house for 50 years. She'd saved those coins, or more likely, inherited them from her parents or grandparents. She'd kept them safe her entire life. Maybe she'd always planned to leave them to someone. Maybe she'd simply forgotten they were there. Either way, they should have gone to her heirs, and I'd stolen them. By Christmas 2023, I couldn't stand it anymore. I did something. I don't know if it helped or made things worse. I tracked down one of the nephews through LinkedIn. His name was Jeremy. He worked in finance in London. I created a burner email account and sent him a message. Dear Mr. I worked on the clearance of your late aunt's property in Bath in 2022. I have reason to believe that valuable items may have been present in the property that were not properly accounted for. I would recommend that you instruct the solicitor to investigate whether a full professional valuation was completed before the house was cleared. There may be assets worth recovering. I am sending this anonymously, as I no longer work for the company involved and do not wish to be identified. A concerned party. Vague enough not to incriminate myself, specific enough to plant a seed of doubt. I never heard back. I don't know if he followed up or if he just deleted the email as spam. The house was sold in August 2022 for £1.2 million, according to land registry records. I checked. So that's my story. I found a box of Georgian and Victorian gold coins in a dead woman's house. The coins were worth over £250,000. I took them, sold them, and used the money to completely change my life. I didn't break any laws, technically. The family had told us to clear the house and dispose of anything that wasn't obviously valuable. One could argue that a box of old, tarnished coins in a dusty box room wasn't obviously valuable to a casual observer. But that's sophistry, and I know it. I stole those coins, and now I have to live with that. Am I sorry? Yes, I regret taking them. Would I do it differently if I could go back? I honestly don't know. That's the truth. I wish I could say I'd do the right thing, but when I was sitting in that box room, holding a box of gold coins worth more money than I'd earn in 10 years, with nobody watching and nobody to ever know, I made a choice. I chose myself. I'm not a bad person. I pay my taxes. I'm kind to people. I donate to charity. I help my parents. But I'm also not a good person. I'm just someone who found a box of gold and made a decision. And I'll carry that decision for the rest of my life. Thank you for watching.